Hey guys, Dimension Master Studios here. How y'all doing? So today marks a very big occasion for Ninjago, as today marks the 10-year anniversary of the Titanium Ninja, the season 3 finale, and arguably one of the most iconic and beloved episodes in Ninjago history. And for good reason, considering the amount of amazing stuff that's present in this episode. And with today marking the 10-year anniversary of this episode, I wanted to take a look back at this episode and discuss the episode and talk about why I love this episode and why, after 10 long years, this is still my favorite Ninjago episode of all time. So, let's get into this whole thing. So the episode starts off picking up right where the previous episode, The Void, came to an end, with the ninja still stuck on the common Arcturus, while the ninjoys are heading back to Ninjago with the golden weapons. And initially, the ninja aren't too sure about what to do, with Lloyd even regretting giving up his golden power given the situation that the ninja are in. However, that's when Garmadon, over the communicator, talks to Lloyd saying that he was wrong and that when it came to Lloyd, he made the right choice in giving up his golden power, because if he didn't, then the situation probably would have been a lot worse. And this is something about Season 3 that I honestly really like, and that is us getting the chance to see a proper relationship between Lloyd and Garmadon. Given how during Seasons 1 and 2, these two didn't really have the best situation going on, given that Garmadon was still a bad guy and Lloyd was destined to fight against him at some point, again, these two didn't really have the best relationship overall. So I think it's honestly really great that all throughout Season 3, we finally got a chance to see these two actually spending time together as father and son and interacting with each other on good terms. It's something that I think was honestly really great to see when it came to Season 3. So anyway, after a bit, the ninja eventually come up with a plan in order to use what remains of the rocket that the ninjoids use and their elemental powers in order to build their own rocket in order to get back to Ninjago. And this is something else that I honestly really like, us seeing the ninja team getting the chance to come together. Given how all throughout the events of the season, the ninja were constantly being divided due to various reasons. Stuff like Lloyd trying to get away from the Overlord and Jay and Cole constantly fighting over Nia. I think it was honestly really great that during this final episode, we actually got a chance to see the ninja team finally coming together after being divided for so long, and we actually get a chance to see the team work together as a team. Again, I think it's something that's honestly really great to see. So anyway, the ninja are ultimately able to make their rocket and they head back to Ninjago. Meanwhile, back in Ninjago, the Overlord is putting the final stages of his plan into motion, with the golden weapons being melted down in order to have them be formed into the golden armor, thus allowing him to become the Golden Master so that way he can eventually take over Ninjago. And we do in fact see this with the Overlord getting his Golden Master armor, allowing him to begin his assault and takeover of Ninjago City. And that is when the ninjas show up, and the sequence that we get is one of the coolest scenes in all of Ninjago. It is so cool, with the ninja re-entering Ninjago's atmosphere, with them being protected by their elemental shields, them flying right over Ninjago City with the people cheering upon seeing their return, with us seeing the team meeting up with Pixel, Nia, Sensei Wu, and Garmadon, with the ninja all getting their vehicles, and the team being fully reunited in order to begin their assault on Ninjago City. This entire sequence, I think, is genuinely so incredibly cool to see, with the music, the people cheering, the action, the entire team working together. Everything about this scene, I think, is genuinely so good. So anyway, the ninja eventually make their way to Ninjago City. However, the Overlord isn't going to make things too easy, as we actually see him using his golden power to take control over Ninjago City itself and reforming it into his own version. Also, he can try and prevent the ninja from getting into the city. And this is a concept that I think is honestly really cool, the Overlord having complete control over Ninjago City, just like what he had in the Digiverse. Zane even points this out during the episode, in fact.
It's just like the Digiverse. His turf, his rules.
Plus, as a result of this, it means that when it comes to the ninja, they gotta come up with new scenarios on the fly in order to deal with what's going on, and they can't just use their normal tactics of going up against bad guys, meaning that when it comes to the ninja, they gotta be quick on their feet, which again, I think that's something pretty cool. So anyway, the team makes their way into Ninjago City, and they get a message from Cyrus Borg telling them to go to the Temple of Fortitude, because in there he actually has a device that can help the ninja against the Overlord. So the team makes their way to the temple. However, in the process, Nia ends up getting taken out. So the team goes over to try and rescue her, which is a little thing that I do honestly really like. The ninja prioritizing saving one of their own when they find out that they're in danger. However, they end up getting interrupted by the Overlord, who tries to take out the ninja with a gigantic spinjitzu tornado. And fun fact, this would actually mark the first time we would ever see a villain actually using spinjitzu against the ninja during the show. While Garmadon did know spinjitzu, we never actually saw him using it against the ninja at any point, meaning that again, the Overlord is the first villain who we ever saw using spinjitzu against the ninja, which I actually think is kind of interesting. And it wouldn't be until season 6 we would see this kind of thing happen again, so when it comes to the Overlord actually using spinjitzu, I think it is honestly pretty cool and unique, especially considering other villains that we have seen when it came to the show. So anyway, the ninja eventually made their way to the Temple of Fortitude, and as it turns out, the Overlord can't do anything against the temple, because when it comes to the Temple of Fortitude, it was something that was used by the Overlord during his initial battle against the first Spinjitzu Master, and as it turns out, the temple has a barrier that's actually immune to golden power. And this is something that I think is really, really interesting. All throughout the events of Season 3, the Overlord was constantly trying to get access to golden power in order to try and use the powers of the first Spinjitzu Master so he could try and take over Ninjago. Meaning that when it comes to the Overlord, he was trying to get the strengths of the first Spinjitzu Master all throughout the season. However, that inadvertently ended up giving the Overlord the exact same weaknesses as the first Spinjitzu Master. Weaknesses that the ninja would actually use against the Overlord during the episode. So, during this episode, we basically get an interesting role reversal for the ninja and the Overlord, with the Overlord essentially using the powers of a good guy in order to try and do evil things, while the ninja essentially used the powers of evil in order to try and do good things in order to defeat the Overlord, which is something that I think is honestly really interesting, especially since we've never really seen this kind of thing before when it comes to the franchise. And following this, the only other times we would really ever get anything like this would be when Garmadon helped out the ninja during Season 10 and Crystallized, so us getting a chance to see this now, I think it is honestly something pretty cool. So anyway, the team meets up in the Temple of Fortitude, and Cyrus Borg ends up revealing the device that he has in order to help the ninja against the Overlord, and that device is a nano pill that will shrink the Overlord down to a tiny size. And I'm gonna be honest, I really, really like this episode. Again, it's my favorite Ninjago episode of all time, and I love so many things about this episode. But this has gotta be one of the most random things that we've ever gotten when it comes to Ninjago, which I think is genuinely saying something. When it comes to the shrinking pill, this had absolutely no setup or build up at any point during the events of Season 3. It's something that comes out of nowhere, and the concept in general honestly just feels a bit too weird in my opinion, even by Ninjago standards. Again, the whole thing just feels really odd, all things considered. That being said though, given what we actually see with the shrinking pill during Season 3, and given how it ultimately doesn't defeat the Overlord in the end, I don't really have a major problem with its inclusion in the season, but still, I think it is a bit of an odd conclusion considering the circumstances surrounding it. So anyway, we then cut back to Nia, who is having some trouble dealing with General Cryptor. However, that's when Nia has the idea to get Cryptor to insult Mindroid, thus resulting in the two of them fighting against each other. Given how Cryptor and Mindroid didn't really like each other over the events of Season 3, I think it's honestly really cool that Nia ultimately used that rivalry and hatred against the two of them, thus allowing her to escape and get back to the rest of the team. I think that was honestly some really great thinking on Nia's part. So anyway, we then cut back to the ninja, who end up getting some Stone Warrior armor, which will give them an immunity to golden power. And one little detail that I do like is that right before the ninja donned the armor, Zane actually offers to give his armor to Pixel in order to try and protect her, showing just how much she means to him. But anyway, the ninja end up donning the armor, and Nia shows up in order to help out with some of the Ninjroids, and we see the team going out in order to deal with the Overlord, while Wu and Garmadon plan on using the shrinking pill to defeat the Overlord. And that's something else that I really like when it comes to this episode. Just like with Lloyd, I think it's honestly really cool that we got a chance to see a proper relationship between Wu and Garmadon during the season, given how all throughout the show up to this point, we constantly saw Wu and Garmadon being on opposite sides, with Garmadon being being a bad guy and Wu being a good guy. And even this season, things ended up switching with Wu being a bad guy for a while and Garmadon being a good guy. I think it's honestly really great that we actually get a chance to see these two working alongside one another and helping each other out. Again, it's something that I think is really cool, especially considering how much these two have been fighting against each other over the show. I think it's honestly great that we finally get a chance to see these two working together. So anyway, the Overlord tries to fight against the ninja, however, the armor ends up working, and the ninja are immune to the Overlord's attacks, and that is when Pythor has the idea for the Overlord to attack the people of Ninjago instead, because while the Overlord can't harm the ninja, he can harm the people. And when the Overlord does start to attack the people, we see the ninja prioritizing trying to save the people, which is something that I like. However, we actually see the Serpentine showing up and they evacuate the people of Ninjago City underground, which is something that I think is genuinely amazing. Given how earlier on during the season, we saw that the Serpentine had changed their ways with them becoming good guys, and they said how they weren't going to get involved in stuff that was going on in the surface, I think it's honestly really cool that we finally got a chance to see the Serpentine actually doing something and helping out the people of Ninjago in order to protect them from the Overlord, meaning that they finally decided to do something about what was going on in the surface, which I think is honestly really cool because this means that they get the chance to show the people of Ninjago that they have changed and they're no longer bad guys, which again, I think that's honestly really cool. But something that I think is interesting is that in a way, this basically allows the Serpentine to do the thing that they wanted to do that we heard about back during episode 4, with us learning that when it came to the Serpentine, they were trying to help the people of Ninjago and protect them from the Golden Master as a result of the prophecy that they had. And during this episode, in a way, we get a chance to see that with the Serpentine being able to help protect the people of Ninjago from the Golden Master. Again, it's something that I think is honestly really cool, and I feel like this honestly works as a really satisfying payoff for that setup that we got earlier on during the season. So anyway, with the people of Ninjago City safely evacuated underground, we see the ninja finally taking action in order to do something against the Overlord, with Wu and Garmadon sending the shrinking pill right towards the Overlord. However, right before it gets to him, Pythor intervenes and ends up swallowing the shrinking pill, thus resulting in him shrinking and him getting chased off by the Falcon, which ends up setting what we would see with Pythor during the events of Season 4. However, the Overlord is furious upon seeing what the ninja tried to do, and he ends up capturing all of them, except for Zane. And this is where we get the scene. Quite possibly the most iconic scene in Ninjago history, with that of course being Zane's sacrifice. And to be completely and totally honest with you guys, just like when it comes to this episode, 10 years later, I love this moment so much, and to this day, it is still my absolute favorite scene in all of Ninjago, and it's not even close. For starters, I think that Brent Miller does an absolutely fantastic job at voicing Zane here. I feel like the voice actors in general always do a genuinely fantastic job at voicing their characters, but this moment in particular, I feel like Brent Miller does an absolutely incredible job at voicing Zane, and you can really feel the emotion when it comes to this scene and how Brent Miller is delivering his lines. I think it's something that's absolutely incredible. We also have a ton of the flashbacks that we get during this scene with Zane's sacrifice, with us seeing a bunch of really big moments when it comes to Zane. Stuff like him unlocking his true potential, him reuniting with Dr. Julian, him and the team working together. A lot of the stuff I think is honestly really great, and it just adds to the emotion of the scene. There's also the song that plays during this scene, Built to Protect, which is my favorite song in all of Ninjago. I think the song is really good, as I feel like the song does a genuinely great job at conveying the emotional weight for what's going on here, and this entire song basically being a tragic version of Zane's theme, I think it honestly works really well at, again, selling the emotion and being really impactful, especially considering what's going on. However, by far the biggest overall reason as to why I love this scene is because of what this means for Zane's character and how this scene perfectly wraps up Zane's story that he went through over the events of Season 3. When it comes to Zane's storyline over the events of Season 3, and really the show in general, it's all about Zane's humanity. When it comes to Zane, back during Season 1, obviously he learned that he was a robot, and he took a bit of time getting used to that, before ultimately accepting the fact that he was a robot and him coming to terms with it. And really, Zane's story ever since that revolved around his humanity and him showing that he's more than just a robot and he is very much human in a number of different ways. This is something that we saw with Zane during seasons 1, 2, and especially 3, and I feel like we especially saw that during this season with Pixel, because all throughout the season, Zane was essentially teaching Pixel how to be more human, with Pixel learning more about what it means to feel emotions. And when it comes to season 3, again, Zane's entire story was basically dedicated to him showing how he's more than just a robot and how he is a human. And when it comes to this scene right here, I feel like it honestly does a genuinely fantastic job at showing this, because when it comes to Zane, in this moment, he is making the ultimate sacrifice by going up in order to face the Overlord all on his own in order to protect the ninja and save everyone in Ninjago City from the Overlord. And here's the thing, Zane knew he wasn't gonna make it out of this. When it comes to Zane, right before he went up to fight against the Overlord, he said this.
Support me, friends, for one last time.
Meaning, Zane knew that when he went up against the Overlord, he wasn't gonna come back. He knew that when it came to this moment, it was gonna be his last moment. However, Zane still went through with it anyway. He still went through with this, and he still went to go and fight against the Overlord, all to protect the ninja and everyone else in Ninjago. Zane was willing to do whatever he could in order to protect his family and the people who he cared about most. The people who took him in and turned him into the person who he ultimately was, Zane was willing to do whatever he could in order to save them, even if that meant he would end up dying in the process. And again, Zane was aware of that, but he still went through with the whole thing anyway. And I feel like that really shows just how human Zane really is by showing the kind of sacrifice that he's willing to make in order to save everyone close to him. And I feel like this can especially be seen towards the end of the sacrifice, because right before we see Zane die, we actually see him smiling. And to me, this says that when it comes to Zane, he's content with the way that he's going out. Again, Zane knew that he was going to die when he went up against the Overlord, but Zane was fine with that. He was fine with making the sacrifice, and again, he knew he wasn't going to survive this, but because of his sacrifice, it meant that the other ninja and everyone else in Ninjago, they were all going to be fine, and they would be protected from the Overlord, and that's why Zane was doing what he was doing. Again, Zane was doing all this in order to protect everyone, in order to save the people who he cared about most, and Zane was completely fine with that. So he went out with a smile on his face. And in my opinion, I honestly feel like this ends up making this one of the most important and impactful sacrifices in all of Ninjago, considering that when it comes to Zane, he was willing to give up everything in order to protect everyone and the people who he cared about most. And again, when it comes to this moment, 10 years later, it is still my absolute favorite scene in all of Ninjago, because as a Zane fan, I feel like this scene does an absolutely perfect job at wrapping up Zane's story that he went through during the season, as well as just perfectly representing Zane's character in general by showing the lengths that Zane is willing to go to in order to protect the people that he cares about, because when it comes to Zane, he was built to protect those who cannot protect themselves. However, with that, the Overlord is ultimately defeated, but Zane dies in the process, with the only part of him remaining being half of his face that fell off during the fight. After this, we then see Cyrus Borg holding a funeral service for Zane, with him unveiling a brand new statue of Zane, dubbing it the Titanium Ninja, which is the title that Zane would actually take for himself during Season 4, which I think is pretty interesting. And we see Kai going to deliver some words for Zane before we ultimately see it snowing. We then cut to Borg Tower, where we see Pixel mourning. However, in Borg Tower, we see some of the monitors starting to activate with recordings of Zane's voice playing, and the machines inside of the factory start beginning to operate. And as it turns out, it's Zane. He is alive, and he is building a brand new body for himself. And this is something that I think is honestly really interesting, as we end up getting Zane's sacrifice and him dying during the episode, but we also see him coming back to life, although not fully, shortly after this. And honestly, I think the episode actually does a good job at handling this, because when it comes to both these instances, the two of them essentially both show what Zane is willing to do for the people who he cares about. When it comes to Zane's death scene, it shows the lengths that Zane is willing to go to in order to protect the people that he cares about. Meanwhile, when it comes to Zane rebuilding himself, it shows the lengths that Zane is willing to go to in order to be with the people who he cares about. Because when it comes to Zane rebuilding himself, he's essentially defying death and finding a way to come back to life, all in order to be with the people who he cares about most. And I think it's honestly really interesting that Pixel is the first person who finds out about this, although it does make a lot of sense given how much Pixel does mean to Zane, especially after everything these two went through over the events of Season 3. And again, I feel like this episode honestly does a really great job at showing this, because in both instances, again, we see the lengths that Zane is willing to go to for the people who he cares about most, which I think is great. We then see Pixel running down into the factory in order to see what's going on, and we see the machines activating with Zane building a brand new body for himself while Pixel looks around, and the season comes to an end with Zane asking Pixel the question,
"Are we compatible now?"
And I think this is honestly a really great line to end things on, because it connects back into what I said earlier about this scene showcasing what Zane is willing to do in order to be with the people who he cares about, with Zane willing to build a brand new body for himself, also that way he can be with the people who he cares about, especially Pixel, the person who Zane arguably cares about the most out of everyone in Ninjago. And so, that is where the episode, and Season 3 as a whole, comes to an end. And in my opinion, when it comes to the Titanium Ninja, like I said, this is my favorite Ninjago episode of all time. There are so many things about this episode that I love so much. From the story, the music, the action, the ideas, and the character work that's done for Zane in this episode, it's absolutely fantastic. And I feel like when it comes to this episode, it honestly operates really well as a perfect conclusion for what is, in my opinion, one of the best Ninjago seasons of all time. I really like Rebooted. In my opinion, 10 years later, it is still one of the best Ninjago seasons of all time, and I think that it is such an underrated and overhated Ninjago season, and when it comes to this finale, it is a big reason why, considering the amount of incredible stuff present within this episode. And as a Zane fan, this episode genuinely means so much to me, considering again, when it comes to Zane's sacrifice, it does an absolutely perfect job at showcasing Zane's character and who he is and what he's willing to do for the people who he cares about. It's something that I think is absolutely incredible, and when it comes to this episode, even though we've gotten a lot of other absolutely fantastic episodes when it comes to the franchise, this episode is always going to have a special place in my heart as being overall my absolute favorite Ninjago episode of all time. I really, really love this episode. And so that's pretty much all I got for you guys. So tell me down below what do you guys think. Tell me what are your guys' thoughts on the Titanium Ninja. Again, tell me down below and I hope you guys enjoy. Later guys, this is Dimension Master Studios, signing off.